So now we have part 2 of our notes on 1920s politics, and we're going to talk about the Calvin Coolidge Administration. From our last set of notes, we had talked about Warren G. Harding, and he dies in 1923 before he can serve out his term. If you remember, Warren G. Harding was well loved among the American people. The economy was doing well. He was very pro-business. People thought that it was a return to normalcy, no more progressive crusades. We were being isolationists. These are all things that make us American happy. But after Harding dies in office, America starts to learn about all the corruption and the scandals that went on his administration. And so Americans are very upset about the government, and they're looking for somebody who can promise to make America decent again, who can make us have faith in our administration again, that they're not corrupt. And we couldn't have found a better candidate for that outside of Calvin Coolidge. He is going to be a very upstanding, moral person who was nicknamed Silent Cal. Right. So what we'll see is that he is certainly pro-business, but he is not going to have any of this. There's not a sniff of scandal in his administration. In fact, a contemporary of the time said that the new White House was as different as a New England front parlor is from a back room in a speakeasy. They're comparing the administrations of Calvin Coolidge, which is very upright and puritanical, very religious, to the administration of Warren G. Harding, with all the partying that he did, and also all of the corruption. And so America is going to fall in love with what we call the Silent Cal. Silent Cal is known for his administration for saying that 4/5 of our country's troubles would disappear if we would sit down and keep still. He is the ultimate, in a sense, do-nothing president. He believes that government should be small, that we should let the people and the economy just run, don't have any progressive crusades, don't have the government involve itself in business, no regulation, and just let the economy run. And so that's partially why he's called Silent Cal. But another reason is because he was very tight-lipped personally. He didn't say a lot. There was a famous story that when there was a state dinner at the White House, these two women were talking, and they were talking about how this president had a reputation for being quiet. And so one lady made a bet with the other. She said, "I bet I can get the president to say at least 3 words tonight, ha, ha, ha." And so she goes to the president, and she told him about her bet. And he looked at her, and he said, "You lose." And then he didn't talk to anybody else for the rest of the night. And so certainly he has a little bit of a joker side to him, but the story is that, again, it all points to the idea that he is a president who believes that the government should sit and do nothing and let business just run. So in some ways this is a return to the Gilded Age again, because during the Gilded Age we had a lot of presidents who most Americans have not heard from before because they were content to just let Congress govern and to let business rule the day. And so let's talk about Coolidge in business. So for his Secretary of Commerce, he nominates a man that we know from World War I in charge of the Food Administration, Herbert Hoover. Hoover did such a good job during World War I getting America to conserve its food and to voluntarily give up things that he's put in charge of the Commerce Department, which is the department that does a lot of dealings with business. And so Herbert Hoover comes up with the idea of associationalism. Associationalism is the idea that we want to promote business in America. The government will keep its hand off of business and will let businesses work together. But Herbert Hoover says that businesses within an industry should form an association or a group. And so let's pretend in this graph we're going to look at, we have 3 companies. They're all steel companies, and they're all competing against each other for business. Well, he says that they should all join together into what he calls a trade association, hence associationalism. And this trade association, the companies will work together to standardize production. In other words, they'll all agree on this is what we're each going to produce. They'll also share information, kind of like a pool. Each company will work together so they can drive out some of the smaller competitors. And then we'll also set prices together once again so we can drive out the smaller competitors. In effect, what Herbert Hoover is creating is kind of a government-assisted trust or monopoly. So we see this is very pro-business, and once again, we see that the government is being the tool or the path to help businesses become bigger and bigger and bigger, more consolidation. So once again, another example of the Gilded Age. So we see a political cartoon come from the time period. It's a bunch of businessmen sitting around playing a piano in the form of a cash register, and they're singing a song, "What a Friend We Have in Coolidge." This is very well liked by the major corporations of America. Consolidation continues. Large companies are going to work together under these trade associations to drive out the smaller companies' competition. Next, Coolidge and farmers. So in the 1920s, farmers were not doing very well economically. What they had done is they once again were a victim of their own success. Farmers have all of this new technology continue to be produced. We have better reapers, we have better planting devices, and so because of this, we see farm production increase. Well, whenever we have a surplus of something, we see prices go down. And so farmers are a victim of their own success, like I said, because there's just so much crop flooding the market that farmers just are getting pennies on the dollar of what they used to get. So farm prices are going down. Making things worse is before the United States got involved in World War I and then during, there was a high demand for American farm goods around the world. And so farmers thought they would make a lot of money if they could just grow more crops. And so they went into debt with banks to buy more land, to buy more machines that were expensive so they could increase their output. And so now they certainly have increased their output, making prices drop, but also now they're in debt to these banks for overextending themselves and buying all this land and new machinery. And so they can't get a lot of prices for their goods, and they can't pay back their loans. And so farmers are in a bad way. Plus, after World War I is over, we see that England and France and Germany and Russia, they all start growing their own food again because their men aren't in combat or aren't in the army. And so we see a world surplus of food on the market, and so prices drop even more. In addition to that, we have kind of a psychological thing going on. Farmers, we know from our previous set of notes, are losing social status. Their children are leaving the farm. They're upset about that. They see that politically, ever since the election of 1896, they don't have as much political power as they used to. You can win elections without the farmer vote, so they're feeling like the government doesn't care about them. Their economy is bad. And then, of course, America is a more urban place now. It seems like cities are where all the action is happening, and America is no longer a farming community. Farmers are just feeling bad about themselves and their economy and their social status. So we can certainly see that the Roaring '20s, while doing great in the cities and on the stock market and the business community, is not good for the farmers. So what are farmers to do with this? So in the 1920s, business reigned supreme, and so farmers realized that if you can't compete with business, if the big businesses are going to run America again, just like they did in the Gilded Age, maybe if you can't beat them, join them. And so farmers tried to consolidate together, just like businesses are doing, and just like businesses are forming their own associations, farmers are going to try to come together and once again form co-ops or cooperatives. They're going to come together and try to pool their resources, pool their money, so they can actually demand a better price, kind of create their own food trust. Now, there are two organizations that do this besides the co-op. We have the American Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union. Both of these, or all three of these, are actually going to be examples of farmers trying to come together, like businesses, creating kind of a food trust or a food monopoly. And they're going to do this by coordinating production, setting prices, those kinds of things. They're even going to go out and hire business CEOs to try to run all of these farmers collectively together as a business. But it fails utterly. Farmers are spread out all across America, and they have to trust one another. If you have a farmer in Minnesota and you have a farmer in Georgia, they're going to have to trust each other that one won't produce more than they said they would, that they won't try to sell their crops cheaper than they said they would. And this is just a real hard obstacle for farmers to overcome because they're so spread out, they can't come together and agree and get to know one another. And so there's a lot of mistrust among the American Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union and the co-ops. And so working together just is not going to be successful for farmers. So the next thing we have is, so if the farmers can't help themselves, that maybe they can look to the government to help them. And so we see the farmers turn to the United States government and say, hey, we need some help. And so the farmers propose something in Congress called the McNary-Hagen Bill. The McNary-Hagen Bill is trying to once again copy business. And so what they decide to do is they ask the government to put a very large tariff on food that's being produced in other countries. So if Russians are producing wheat, or the people in England are producing corn, and they try to sell it to America, we put up a big tariff. So McNary-Hagen is a tariff bill, and it'll make prices of foreign food so high that Americans are forced to buy American food products, which of course will help American farmers out. Maybe they'll get rid of some of the surplus if Americans have to buy their food from American farmers. The other thing the McNary-Hagen bill asked to do is they said to the government, look, to get rid of even more of this surplus, why doesn't the government go out and buy all of the farm or the food that is not consumed by Americans in cities and then just buy it? So the government will just buy all the excess food and then they'll just sell it at a very cheap price on the world market, dump it on the world market. This will be doubly effective. One, it'll get rid of the food surplus in America, which will raise prices if there's not a food surplus, and it'll also destroy their foreign competition. If you're a farmer in Russia and you're trying to sell your food, but American food just gets dumped on the Russian market for very cheap prices, it's going to drive Russian farmers out of business. And so we see this is the farmers' great hope, that the McNary-Hagen bill will pass Congress and the government will come to the rescue and help them out. But Calvin Coolidge vetoes the bill twice, so it never goes into effect. Calvin Coolidge, again, believes that the government should do nothing. Yes, he's in favor of helping big businesses, but he doesn't think that we should help farmers. It's not, he thinks, the government's role to pass tariffs to help farmers. And so this angers farmers even more because they see businesses getting ahead. They see the East Coast elite getting ahead, manufacturing getting ahead in the 1920s, but not the people down on the farm. And so there's lots of resentment. We touched on this in our last set of notes about the social conservatism, and this all kind of ties together as to why farmers are so angry in the 1920s. Next, let's talk about labor unions and workers in the 1920s. The 1920s had a very good economy, as we can see on the graph below. From about 1921, about 1929, the United States economy is growing at a rapid pace, primarily because of America's insatiable desire for consumer goods. And so we see factories are opening up, factories are hiring more shifts. We see factories, because of restrictions on immigration, labor scarce, and so we see workers make more and more and more money. And so it's actually the 1920s is a good time for workers, for labor, as wages go up and the economy is so good. However, that doesn't mean it's a good time for unions. If the economy is good and jobs are plentiful, what we're going to see is that there's no reason to join a union. Why should I give up some of my paycheck, a worker would say, for union dues if times are good? There's no reason to join a union. The only time to join a union is when things are bad and I'm not getting enough pay. And so we see union membership decrease, kind of inversely proportional to the economy increasing at this time. Another reason for the decrease of labor unions is, besides people just don't want to join unions because the economy is so good, is, as we had said before in our last lecture, is we're going to have a whole series of conservative judges, and they're going to do their very best to weaken unions, especially through the injunction. Whenever a union goes on strike, the courts are going to take the side of primarily of the owners, and they're going to use the injunction to break the strike. Another reason that we see unions have a tough time is the American public associates labor unions with socialists and communists, and so they're going to be attacked during the Red Scare. And so to say I belong to a union is almost like saying you're a communist. And so who needs the harassment of being in a union? If jobs are plentiful, wages are up, I don't want to pay my union dues. The strike is probably going to fail anyway because of injunctions, and I don't want to be labeled a communist. And so all of these are reasons why we see labor and union membership go down, but yet there's even more. If you remember from the Gilded Age, there were these things called yellow dog contracts. In other words, you wouldn't be hired. You had to take an oath. You had to sign a piece of paper when you got hired in a job that you will never join a union. And this went away during the Progressive Era because progressives trying to help workers, but now we see with all this conservatism back, we're going to see yellow dog contracts reinstated. And so it's going to be hard to join a union because when you signed your contract to get the job, you had to promise you wouldn't. Then we also get these things called open shops. An open shop means, well, let's talk about a closed shop first. A closed shop means that in order to work for that company, the union is so strong they force the company to agree to a closed shop. It means that the only people that can work in that factory have to join a union. You have to be a member. We see this today in examples like Albertsons or King Soopers. If you want to work for that supermarket, you're going to have to join a union. That makes for a really strong union if everybody is in the union, so strength in numbers. But this is the 1920s, and union membership is declining, so lots of states create open shop laws. In other words, you don't have to be in a union to work there, and so this weakens unions. Next, we see the development of welfare capitalism, which is kind of strange two words to put together. But welfare capitalism is saying it's when businesses they need to attract workers because there is so many jobs that are plentiful. There's actually a shortage of workers to fill those jobs, and so in order to attract workers to your company, businesses start competing with each other to go get workers. And so what they do is they create this thing called welfare capitalism to attract workers to their company or to their factory. And so they offer their employees things like profit sharing. In other words, if the company does well that quarter, because we all worked hard and the company's made good decisions, then all of their employees will get to share in the profits of the company. Something very similar to that is the idea of bonuses. In the past, this was just something that the management would get, or the CEOs. Now we're going to let workers get bonuses. So if the company makes a lot of money, everybody's going to get a little something in their paycheck once or twice a year for all of your hard work. Next, we see health programs. For the first time, we see private industry factories say to their workers, look, if you come to work for us, we'll pay for some of your doctor visits or your dentist visits or your eye visits for an eye doctor. And so this is attracting workers. And then the last thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is that companies start to promise their workers pensions. A pension is, in other words, so if you work for this company for, let's say, 30 years, when you retire, the company is going to still keep on paying you. Yes, at a reduced rate, but they're going to keep on paying you for all of your loyal service. So you put all of these things together, they are all attempts or ways that factories can attract workers to come to their factory. And this really only works if there's a shortage of labor, which is what we have in the 1920s. And so this is welfare capitalism. So if you're a worker and you see all of these amazing things that you could get and all of the negatives for joining a union, we're going to see union membership go down in the 1920s. Next, we have veterans. So there's over 1 million American veterans that served in World War I. And so when the veterans come home, they're upset because they answered their nation's call and they signed up or got drafted and they went over to France to fight. So while they're over there fighting and getting very low pay as a soldier in the United States Army or in the United States Navy, the people who stayed in America, who worked in the factories, they actually got promotions and they got more pay. They got more pay certainly than soldiers do. And so when the veterans return from World War I, they think, hey, this isn't fair. The people that stayed in America now are our bosses, and they got a lot more pay than we did, and we fought for America. And so they're very upset about this. And so what they propose to the United States government is the Adjustment Compensation Act. What it says is that the Adjustment Compensation Act says that when these veterans get old enough to retire, the United States government is going to compensate them for all the wages they missed out on because they were fighting instead of in a factory. It's kind of like a pension for veterans. And so the veterans are very excited about this. They hope this happens. But Calvin Coolidge vetoes this bill, right? We'll talk about that in a second. And so this bonus that's going to happen in 20 years, it won't happen until 1949. It will be a sizable chunk of change, about $3.5 billion. But Calvin Coolidge vetoes this bill because he doesn't believe it's the government's job to do it's kind of a progressive idea. The government start taking care of veterans. And he thinks he's a conservative. He wants the government to be small and out of businesses' affairs. And so he vetoes this. But Republicans in Congress, for once, they don't get along with their president because this, of course, will get them a lot of votes. if they vote for this and override Coolidge's veto, then we're going to make veterans loyal Republicans for years to come, because it's the Republican Party that got them this pension, this bonus. And so we see this is one of the rare instances where Calvin Coolidge is overridden by his Republican friends in Congress. And so the veterans are going to get their bonus, and it's supposed to kick in 1949. However, we're going to find out that they actually will want it sooner than that because of the Great Depression. More about that later. So the last slide we have for Coolidge is Coolidge's foreign policy. So far we've talked about Coolidge's domestic policy, very pro-business, not necessarily helpful to farmers or veterans, but what does Coolidge feel about the U.S. involved in the world? And just like Harding, he is an isolationist. He certainly wants to continue helping business, but for the most part, he is an isolationist. He doesn't want the United States to get involved in any more wars, let alone any progressive crusades. And so one of the things he does to keep America out of wars is that he signs the Kellogg-Briand Pact. It's this international treaty that says that the United States will not fight any more wars. And, over 60 nations, something like that, will sign this pact, basically outlawing war in the world. Now, it's a very noble idea, but it's not very practical. But it's an example of his isolationism. He is promising the American people that we will not go to any more wars. So isolationism. This makes him very popular with the public. The other thing that happens is in 1924, not too long after he takes office, after Harding had died, is there is an economic crisis going on in Europe. Because of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to do what we call war reparations. In other words, they had to pay England and France back for the cost of the war. And Germany just can't do this. Their economy is not good. The treaty, the Ford-Macumber Treaty we talked about, is not allowing them to improve their economy, and so Germany is economically struggling. We'll talk about this more when we talk about the beginnings of World War II, but Germany has out-of-control inflation, they have high unemployment, and Germany is about to default on their reparations. In other words, they're about to tell England and France that, I'm sorry, but we can't pay you all of this money we're supposed to pay you for World War I. Now, how does this involve the United States? Well, during World War I, England and France borrowed a lot of money from U.S. banks to pay for World War I. And the only way England and France can pay back their money to U.S. banks is because of the German war reparations. And so we have kind of this cycle of money, right? We have Germany who has to pay England and France for the cost of the war, and then England and France are using that money to pay the United States bankers the money they borrowed from World War I. So if Germany can't pay its reparations, and England and France can't pay back United States banks, we have a crisis, an economic crisis in the United States. And perhaps the Great Depression starts a little bit early in 1924. So to promote business and to protect the economy, Calvin Coolidge decides to get involved. So just like Harding, he's isolationist unless it helps business. And so what he encourages the United States to do, what the United States will do, is they will refinance some of the loans to England and France, so they're going to have an easier time paying it back. But the United States will also loan money to Germany. So follow this flow of money. The United States is going to loan money to Germany. Germany is going to then turn right around and use that money to pay back its war reparations to England and France, and then England and France is going to use that money to pay back the United States. And so we see this kind of cycle of money going back and forth across the Atlantic. It sounds like a silly idea, but it does keep the international economy afloat for several years. Now, the only problem with this is this system will work so long as the U.S. economy is doing well. If the U.S. economy collapses and we can't loan Germany money anymore, then the whole house of cards falls apart, and not only the United States goes into a panic and a depression, but the entire Western world. So when we come back, we will be talking about the next president's administration, which, as we will see, is going to be Herbert Hoover.